Right. So, yeah, what I refer to developing the calendar of the soul to guide the pedagogical year, the process and the content. Let's see, I didn't actually make any copies of this, but just to your reference, we're not really actually going to use this three-folding thing, but it will be kind of, I will refer to it a little bit.
You remember that?
Yeah. So basically what you all are doing, or anyone who's going to be doing the calendar so for their class, is trying to articulate whatever your feeling perception is around your class. Mm-hmm. And that feeling perception, of course, it arises just in response to the children themselves, but it also can be informed by kind of three archetypal aspects of the class. The first of those being just what we talked about last, understanding for your class, and it's different for your class. Mm-hmm. But in this case, for the grade, just understanding what is the transition, the cognitive transition that I'm expecting to happen in the year. Mm-hmm. And so you just hold that, not, in your consciousness, as you're holding your children.
So that might determine kind of the nature of the image.
Right, exactly. And another thing that will determine that is the evolution of consciousness. Now this again is applying more to the grades because I didn't necessarily know that kindergartners were coming. And so you, in the case of the first grade, you're looking, of course, the literature, the grade literature that informs us about the evolution of consciousness that's going on. And it says first and second grade is a little bit very, very similar. I mean, first in kindergarten, the fairy tales and the folk tales, because the fairy tales are different because in the grades with the fairy tales, you move more into the prince and princess kind of image where there's ego and so forth is there. Where in kindergarten, the fairy tales don't have that. Even though we know that the prince and princess are one aspect of the personality, you still have in those two characters an ego and a so forth. Mm-hmm. Whereas in kindergarten, the stories usually don't have that ego and so forth in the stories you would tell.
So he was explaining before, like the processes, how they, like if you're working in the natural world, like the elementals, it's like it's just happening. Like it's just metabolic, right? It's just happening, and then when you move into grades and really out of first grade, then you start thinking about the ego, like actually doing things, like doing the math, doing the reading, or doing the drawing, where in first grade it's just kind of still more like just metabolic, like it's just happening. The teacher tells it rather than the children, engaging in it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So of course, that content, what speaks to the consciousness of the children is another thing you're going to be holding as you try to come up with your calendar of the soul. Mm-hmm. And of course, the third thing, which is usually, many times, central, sometimes, it depends on what arises for you, is the seasonal activity of the soul life, which, looks at the four archangels. And also, last week you had you had that whole content that I developed on correspondences. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's why I developed those too. Those can help with that. But in the absence of that, you simply have the seasonal activity of the soul life, which basically, Uriel, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. Mm-hmm. And then you have the picture of them from the flower. Uriel's the fruit, summer fruit, which is ripened in the summer. Michael is seed, that comes into the fall. Gabriel is a new plant, and Raphael is the flowering in the spring. And so you have that seasonal flow. And then Uriel represents the cosmos. And Michael, so what happens in summer, of course, that ether goes out into the cosmos. Mm-hmm. And then it comes back into the head, mm-hmm. Around Michaelmas time. Mm-hmm. And that's why we see all of these, in that time of year, we have these stories about the elementals and things, because they come back down mm-hmm. into the sense life. And so right. you kind of become aware of the elemental world when it comes out of the cosmos and back into this realm of the head. And then, of course, the Christmas time moves on into the heart, and then moves into the limbs. And so you have that sense of the year also. And then you can also look at the traditional festivals of the year. Uriel, you're looking at Easter to Pentecost. And of course with Michael, Michaelmas to All Souls. Thanksgiving to Epiphany for Gabriel, and Candlemas to Easter for Raphael. And so that gives you a picture of the season. And what speaks it to, I think, this picture of the plant, is and not understanding through the year, what are you doing? This is just one, the seed, the new plant, the flowering. That's always a classic image that you can use as a foundation. But any of these are, and then like you said, so you sort of you get a feeling perception for how that connects with the cognitive movement of the year, how it connects with the human consciousness that you're working with, and so that all of these are sort of there. Now there could be other elements you bring, just your impression from the class, like for yourself. You'll get impressions from your class based on, how much fire you have in your class, other elements. There's all these other elements that come into it. But these are sort of the central three things, and then you want to get up. And it's important to try not to leap to an analysis and to really come up with a feeling perception, to let something arise within you that is not initially, is felt, not perceived initially. Because we have a tendency to miss our feeling perceptions and to go to something that is more perceptual and so I think the intuitive process doesn't really happen, because it should start with that vague feeling of, that feels right. And then you do the work to get that feeling perception out. And that's the part that we're going to talk about, and that's the part that's kind of difficult, so it's to really do the work. But there's a little bit of a roadmap for doing it, and I think it's a good model for that is the incarnation. The incarnation is the same thing, except for instead of the feeling perception, you have the individual human being in their essential, in their essence, coming into the world, and very similar way to how we're trying to get this feeling perception, to give it birth. The human individual, which has went through the whole process of Devachan and coalesced its essence and come to a new life. It has a process of incarnation, which I think is very similar to the process that we want to use to give birth to our feeling perception. So hopefully we'll kill two stones, two birds with one stone. And
I mean, it's always like that.
So let me go. So I'm going to briefly talk about that process of incarnation of the human being. And so you have this. First, you have this the pre-birth, where the child is coming through the 7 planetary spheres and establishing themselves as being in time-space. And as they do that, of course, it's a whole karmic thing. They're gonna pick a place in time, space, and they're going to orient their being in the world in such a way that there's potential for them to realize some destiny. And so you can call the model body, or the astral forces, or you may call it the musical forces. All of what's happening, what's being exhibited in this process of orienting in the world, in the pre-birth process, is, in a sense, I use these three words: exhibited, inhibited, and expressed. And so what you really have in every case in terms of the human being is the etheric, the formative force. And that force, the astral and the hereditary are working on that. Either they're trying to get exhibited through the etheric force, like the hereditary force wants to get expressed. And so it tries to get its nature exhibited through the etheric force. Now, and you also have the astral forces, which when the child is developing after birth, is usually an inhibited force in the first 7 to 14 years. It's really trying to inhibit the influence of heredity in such a way that allows for the destiny of the child not to be overwhelmed by the hereditary forces. And so the astral force and the musical forces are more inhibiting in the initial 7 to 14 years, whereas the hereditary forces are more exhibiting. They're trying to exhibit themselves, and they're being held back by the astral forces and sort of curved back on themselves a little bit. And we know that the way that we help that process is through bringing of the arts. And we use the arts to help those astral forces hold back the tendencies and the hereditary forces.
So interesting.
But when the person in pre-birth, I use the word exhibited. The astral forces actually are exhibiting themselves. They're exhibiting themselves in that they orient the being of the individual as well as choose where in time space your karma requires you to be born. And so that is a direct reflection of the astral forces. That's why I use the word exhibited.
So when you talk about the model body, is that another thing? Is that another way to say like destiny?
Yeah.
So your model body, whatever you are supposed to, I guess, look like, function like, think like.
To be able to realize your destiny.
In order to realize your destiny.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's basically what is happening in Devacon.
Right. All the decisions that you're making are the
right.
things that you're saying, I want to come out and do X, Y, Z.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now I need to be able to mold a body that is potentially have the capacity to move in that direction. Mm-hmm. And we know the clay is going to be the hereditary stuff. Mm-hmm. So now I have to be able to inhibit that clay in just the right way so that it becomes a body which is able to express the destiny of the individual. And the first resource is making sure that the quality in the seven spheres, the quality of being in the seven spheres is such that the capacities are going to pour into you, and that you're born in a time and place that allows that opportunity to meet the world. And one thing that Steiner talks about, he gives a picture of this, I don't remember exactly where he gives it at, but he talks about karma is like like our memory. What happens is that the world remembers us in the same way we remember something. So I see something in the world, and now what I see in the world causes me to have a memory, And so when the individual comes into the world actually remembers that human being in the same. You can think of it almost the same way you remember something in response to something you see in the world. And so as the individual comes through those planetary spheres, at each point, the world remembers that individual and orients out of that memory. Just like in response to our memory to something in the world, that memory then works on us Like I see something in the world, oh yeah, I remember that. It makes me feel a certain way, it causes an effect on me. And the same way, the world itself is oriented in response to the incarnating individual through each of the 7 spheres. And that's the music, and that's the working of the musical forces exhibiting what is necessary in each of those 7 spheres for the child to realize its destiny. And then those forces later on are going to work into the etheric in helping to mold the hereditary forces into what is necessary. And so if you can think of that, the world I always like that picture, the world remembers you as you incarnate. And it responds in the same way you would respond, and therefore orients to your being. And then all of this responsiveness then meets you. That's what karma is. The world responds to you as you incarnate, and then the world meets you with those responses in your living. Okay, so that's pre-birth, and so the musical forces, we say, have exhibited what is necessary for your destiny to unfold. But of course, you have these hereditary forces that won't. And so you can. So when now, let me go ahead back and talk a little bit about how that relates to feeling perception. So when for something to exist on the material plane, in a way, what has to happen is that you got to have the unity has to coexist with the polarities. If they don't, if the unity doesn't coexist with the polarities just negate one another, and nothing can manifest. And there's actually you can show this like contemporary physics, when there's a theory called Rishon's that shows how the world starts off with these fundamental elements that are totally equally negative and positive. And there's a certain way that these negative and positive things will orient and mix together to end up with no negative and positive. They will just be concrete elements in the world. From this polarity, the things that are the elements. What it does actually, say, if I can give you a good explanation, you have a polarity, and no, I'm going down that. Goes too far off. But there is a concrete way in which that actually is true in the world. And we look in the world and we see solid things, but in reality, underneath there's an exact equality of negative and positive. But because of the way it orients itself, we don't experience it. We experience everything as being material and matter. We don't see antimatter in the world. We did, supposedly. Everything unmanifest. Right. But there's an organization that can take place, a specific organization that happens in a certain kind of way that allows things to manifest. And so what you need to do when you're feeling perception, you got to say, okay, I got to hold this unifying quality of the feeling perception. I got to articulate what it is. What is this? But I also got to articulate the polarities that come out of that. And then I have to bring those in relationship. That's what we do with the three-folding, the initial phase of the three-folding. But that's just the initial phase. And you can say, and that's like the incarnating pre-birth phase. And then once we have that feeling perception, that image that comes out of the feeling perception that has those 3 elements, it has like when we were doing this last time, we ended up with this unity, sense of spinning movement, rough and tumble movement. The image was coalescence of currents and droplets of water. So that was the image. And then we have to say, well, what was the polarity of that? Mm-hmm. What would that exist? Because this image, coalescence of currents and droplets of water, what would be the polar elements that would come from that unity? And then we have to relate those back. How then is this connected? Can we articulate how it's connected? And how can we, in this polarity, how it's connected? And that's what you initially do to get your image, to get your solid.
So are you kind of saying that you would look at the polarity of the class, like, I don't even know, like something like, you go as simple as like birthdays or something, or like the spread of the birthdays, or I don't know. I'm trying to
No,
think of stuff
no,
like-
I'm not actually. I'm saying whatever image that seems to be coming out of your feeling perception, you want to make sure. Then you want to say, okay, that's my image. What are the opposing elements in that image?
Okay.
So you want to find the opposing elements in your image that you come up with.
Okay, so not so concrete. So more like it's a duck swimming on water.
Right.
So,
And that's your image, and then you say, okay, well, duck swimming on water.
Right.
What are the opposing elements in that image?
Right.
You know, and that's like the difficult part. Okay, duck swimming on water. Well, the duck could fly,
Right.
or the duck could go under. That may be the opposing quality. So you could say duck dipping into water, duck taking off.
Right.
And I'm just giving examples. But
Sure.
there would be some element that would come out of you, because it could be unique for you, that you would think is being oppositional out of the
In that
union,
image.
out of the image. And once you have those, then that becomes the stuff that you can start working with. Well, where did that come from? How does it really relate? How does this oppositional image relate back to the unity? And then you get another element of the image. And you do that on each side. And then you have between the polarities the disunity. What is the opposite, the real opposite of my image? Not the polarity, which is different, but the disunity of my unifying image. And once you have those 6 things, then you have an image that's just pretty complete, that you can now work with. But before you get those, the image, in a sense, you can say that the intuitive quality that's there is not going to be complete.
It's not enlivened, it's just a picture.
Right, and that's how you enliven it. So now I can work with this, and this image is not relevant yet.
Right.
That's the next phase. It's not relevant to my class. It is, because I got the field perception from experience in my class, but now I got to make it relevant to the work I'm going to do until they have for children. That's the next phase. And that relevance making is when you're actually doing the next part, where it's like the birth and development of the child. So that's the first thing that you do. And I'm thinking, in a sense, we're not really doing, I don't know how much y'all want this to be a workshop and just a picture. We can maybe see how far we can get. In a way, if we depend, and then if you all want to work on that, or you want to just take it away. I was thinking more that I would give you the process and the content to use.
That's fine.
And then you would work on it.
Yeah, that's okay. So otherwise we're in a short time.
Exactly. So what happens next? You have, if it was a human being that was developing, what would happen is that the human being comes down, the individuality meets the hereditary forces, the etheric then begins to express the physicality develop the physical nature and the life body of the child. At the same time, out of the pre-life, remember the human being there's been an orientation that's taking place up here, and this is an important thing. So I don't know if I should have brought that. I don't know if I have it. I had a little video that shows this pretty clearly, but let me go ahead and show you. So you have this human being coming in. Actually, I do have a picture here. Maybe y'all can come over and see the picture. The picture I use. I actually have a program that does this.
Oh yeah, I did see that.
You've seen it before? So the human being comes in, and as it comes through these spheres, it like sends a pulse out, which we can say is the exhibition of its nature at each of the planetary places. And it goes through.
It affects the world.
Exactly, and so it affects the world. It goes all the way down until it meets the individual meets the hereditary forces sphere. And then the development of a human being starts. And that's basically the etheric force. It starts developing a human being. Now what's going to happen as it moves back up through these modes, these are 7-year phases, it actually, its expression is a vibration going out. So you have these vibrations which are already out, right? And then then the human being starts moving up and it's expressing itself. Well, what eurythmy is that expression which went out into the world when the child was being born, coming back and going through the body. And when it goes through the body, it actually, that's what speech, that's what all the speech forms that eurythmy are really, that's what they are, the manifestation of this moving through the etheric of the musical forces. Now the musical forces above here are actually coming back too. And these are the ones, this is a model body, and these are the ones that are going to be inhibiting. These are inhibiting up here. From these musical forces that went out in the world are the ones that are up here unconsciously trying to form.
Coming back in.
And so you have these musical forces which are trying to inhibit the action, the expression of the material forces. At the same time, you have these musical forces which are coming toward the expression on this plane. And what happens, what our struggle and growth is do we remember who we are enough to receive that help from the world that's coming back at us? Or do we actually become too much of a material nature and push against that? And so our work as teachers are basically that, trying to make sure that we keep those inhibiting forces holding back the hereditary forces so that the body that's created is one that can receive that help from the world. And so then it goes in phases. What we call the consciousness soul part. We have the emergence of the etheric, freeing of the etheric in the first 7 years, and then with the freeing of the astral, and then the freeing of the ego. And then we have this consciousness soul part that happens. That consciousness soul part is really what is developed in this interaction between your expressive quality and the musical forces that are coming at you. And this is when that flip happens, because as you get to be about 14 years old, that's what you're going to be, those forces are going to be trying to inform you. They're going to try to inform the etheric expression in a different way, and that's why puberty happens.
So interesting. So Jamin says the form goes from adolescence goes from the outside to the inside.
Right.
So where the form for first grade is a circle, and then the form for 12th grade is also a circle, but it's this circle. It's in
right, exactly,
in the body circle. So that
And so if you aren't able to get that informing, then you just become more and more in your hereditary nature.
Right.
But actually, in a way, it's kind of an interesting thing that happens, because true gender orientation is really coming from these forces out here. That's really, in a way, the what's the word for it? The nature of these musical forces has intrinsically in it the archetype of gender, and so before that, the archetype of gender is not actually in the hereditary forces. If you read what's the book we were studying here when we were trying to work with that? We were working with that gender issue, and we were studying cosmic what?
Cosmic thought and
what's that book of his? Cosmic something or other. I'm so old. It's like theosophy, but it's more detailed. It's called Cosmic something.
Yeah.
And it talks exactly about how these astral forces and how gender arises, and we're recapitulating that process when we move into that point at which we are experiencing these forces coming at us, which are trying to inform us in a certain way. And we have this battle that takes place between the hereditary forces and the forces that are trying to say, no, you need this polarity in your life. Right. This polarity is going to then, out of that polarity, you're going to be able to build something new. You may give something birth to something new. Without that polarity, you can't give birth to anything new.
Right.
You just take forward what is coming out of the past. And so I kind of went farther with that than I needed to. I really just want you to get the sense that there is this, this incarnating thing where the astral and musical forces are exhibited in the orientation of our being and where we are in time and space. And then we have these hereditary forces trying to exhibit themselves through their third life, and we have this inhibiting of those. And then as we toward 14, we have these forces coming at us from the world, which are trying to inform us more about our destiny and who we need to be. And so you have that threefold. So that's a threefold process. Then we want to emulate that threefold process when we're working with our feeling perception, which is to first give the feeling perception, help it manifest by doing that polarity, by getting the polarity to coexist with the unity. That's how we get the feeling perception to manifest. And then we got to evolve its relevance. We got to evolve its relevance, and to evolve its relevance, we basically now begin to look more closely at these archetypal elements. We ask ourselves the question, what do I expect to happen this year cognitively for the child, as I talked about at the beginning? What do I expect? What is the intrinsic archetypal consciousness of the child? Mm-hmm. So then I'm giving the physicality, the meat to the image. I'm taking the image and I'm saying, okay, now I'm going to take that image I got, and now I'm going to look at it in terms of these expectations for what I'm going to do in the year. And I want to, and you want to find where you're being informed about those things in your image. So I look at the image of the duck on the pond, and I say, what does the duck on the pond tell me about this transition from correspondence to analysis? What information, what wisdom is there, in this element? And you'll probably find that that's easier than you think, because you have all those polarities. You've done all that work before, and you begin to able to work with articulating that relationship because you have those 6 parts of your image. And then you ask the question, okay, what about the human consciousness that I'm working with? And now I'm making that image relevant. When I can articulate these things in terms of my image, I'm making the image relevant. I'm putting meat on the image. I'm making it something that the wisdom will be revealed at this point that's there. And then I look at the seasonal elements. And there are other things, like the whole list I gave you. There's other aspects. And then there's the aspect of the class itself. You look at the class. Okay, my class has all this fire in it. So how does it relate to this image? Right. How am I being informed about this fire in the image? And so you do that work, and that's the second part of the, and you still do that part in the same way though. You take the unity that you get here, and by looking at this unity and looking at the polarities and the connections you make, you ask the question too. I say, okay, how does this articulate the cognitive transition I expect in the year? And then I would write that here. And then what I would do is I would try to come up with comparable. Okay, well, if that's how this relates to the cognitive transition, then I'll do the same thing. Then I'll make polarities. And I'll say, okay, what is the polarity coming out of that understanding of cognitive transition? So you're using this model, but first, once you have done this, you have to set this up first, because when I give a concrete example, so I have a duck, and I want to know if I have a lot of fire in my class, and I'm going to say I want to know, But how is a duck swimming?
Right.
What wisdom is being revealed there?
Must be very bright stuff.
And it could be what motivates. I mean, duck has fire in it. It dips down in that water and gets those fish.
Sure. Comes up really, like, flaps really hard on the water.
So you would then write whatever you thought the element of fire would be here to articulate that. Then you would use this as a reference. You'd say, okay, well, this is what I said about the polarity for this image. I look at that polarity and say, what wisdom can I draw out of this polarity that creates the polarity for this image? Mm-hmm. Okay. And you do that whole process utilizing what you came up with on the first page, and therefore farther articulate the relevance in terms of what you did before. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, when you've done the relevance, the last thing is you have to then, say, well, how does that fit into the curriculum? What is the structural, what will some of the structural manifestation of this wisdom in my curriculum? And it could be, for you it could take place in terms of looking at just the block sequence, or it could take place in looking at how is this image of the fire in the duck going to unfold through whatever the curriculum is. And you may do that through whatever the elements in your week or day usually are, where the elements you usually bring. So you try to now take this articulation of the image relevance that you've gotten, and you now fit it into the third thing is to fit it into your curriculum. Now, and you think of this as how you are now making. And we talked about how you have the astral forces coming in and they're trying to inform the etheric body. So this is what you're doing now. Remember, think of the hereditary impulse as being whatever methods teaching you do. Mm-hmm. You have certain methods you do every year. You have certain methods you do every year. And you could be a water teacher, you could be a pure methods teacher. Here you take those methods, the hereditary impulse, and you inform it with your feeling perception. You say, well, how is this going to express itself in those methods? And therefore, you actually take the hereditary forces and you make them more irrelevant and transform them to be forces that actually are responsive to your class out of the image you do. Which, is very important in terms of this is one place we have to be careful in what we fall into, becoming methods teachers, Right. So doing the calendar of the soul works against that methods teaching, so that we actually are, teaching from the in outward. It's a soul expression, and it's not just, I know the things you do in the water school. I know what the main lesson, the threefold lesson looks like, and I'm just doing that. Right. And it hasn't been informed by the calendar. So that's why water teachers should always do a calendar of the soul. Otherwise, the falling into methods teaching is going to be too easy. And then it's not really that unique, because they do that every year. You get a teacher who comes up with a really neat way of educating, they have a lot of success, and then someone says, hey, do it this way. Yeah. And then they find they don't have any success, because it wasn't their soul like that they emerged from. Right. And so that's always got to be there to experience that success. And so... from there. Well, let's see if we need any clarification around it, what I brought so far. What I've brought so far is I've tried to create this connection between how the human being incarnates and develops in terms of the intuitive process. And is that something that can people live into that? Can you see how that can go? How you have this manifestation of your feeling perception is the same as the manifestation of the human being and giving birth to a human being. Sure. And then you have this period of development where you have to make it relevant. The human being, hereditary forces have to be made relevant, Right. And so you say, how is this feeling, perception, this image which I have, how is it relevant to the actual what I know? And this part is about the child. The relevance part is about the methods. I mean, when you ask, the third part is about the methods that you bring. The second part, making your image relevant, is all about the child. What's the cognitive expectation for the year? What's the consciousness of the human being in that year? And then how do human beings move through the season? So we're making it relevant by looking at the human being themselves, right, and trying to inform our image with the human being themselves. And then we're creating, out of our methods, we're actually making those methods into something living by informing those methods with this image we have and how it relates to the human being. So now we have something which is actually a living, enlivened curriculum, about, through the work of the Calendar of the Soul. And the way you do that, just to reiterate, you have your unity, you have your polarities of the image, because now you break it. Now you're trying to unfold the image itself, get it out of a vague thing into something that's not any longer vague. So you have the unity, you have the polarities, relationship between the polarities and the unity. Now you're going to utilize these. Then you say, okay, how does this become relevant? In the way I'm talking about, and that's what my next page does. I might not have the right pages for that. That's the actually relevant page. So then you take that and you put it in the unity place. Mm-hmm. You ask yourself, how do I take this unity picture and express it in these terms? And then once I do that, I can use the information I already have here to draw out these elements. So
if you start with the duck, and then you go to
polarity here.
The polarities, so the diving and the
right.
Flying.
Right.
And then when you come to this next page.
Well, before that, you actually create. You say, okay, I have a duck, and I have diving as a polarity with the flying. Uh-huh. And then I got to say, what is the connection between? Okay, I have the duck. Okay. You may say, wow. Okay, what is the significance of the duck's diving? Okay. Before you go on, you have this little part right here.
Something like the duck's diving because it's searching for food.
Right, it could be that.
Or.
And then over here, why would the duck fly? Why does the duck lift itself off the pond?
Duck would fly to get away from danger.
Right, whatever it might be, that's the work you do, to whatever feels good. So then you have these 6 elements. Uh-huh. Oh, and then you have this one. What is the opposing thing? You have duck on the pond. What is the opposing element there?
What would be the opposing for
duck? So what's the quality of the duck being on the pond? It may be the duck out of water in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Or asleep on its nest.
And in those situations, what's different is the potentiality. Like if the ducks in the woods are different potentiality. Flight is not as easy.
Right.
I mean, so that situation doesn't have the same quality. And so it doesn't lead to this polarity.
Right. Okay.
And so that's another element you want to be looking at. When is the unifying image not supported? Mm-hmm. And so then once you got all 6 of those, then you're going to make them relevant. And you start making them relevant by first articulating the unifying picture in terms of these archetypes. So you say, how does this teach me about some element of the class I already have, like the fiery nature of the class fire? What does it tell me about going from correspondence to analysis? What does it tell me about the egoic, ego soul response to nature? When the ego and soul are still unified, they haven't split yet. That's before first grade. The ego and soul are still don't even manifest. Your fairy tales don't traditionally have as many prince and princess stories in them as you tell in the early grades. And so you may look at that. What can I say out of this image that tells me about that consciousness? And you may say, well, what in this picture is telling me about that emergence? Even though they're still one, they're unified, now I have ego and so forth is operating. In the realm, though, still of the fairy realm, still in the fairy realm. So my stories...
Right. It's like you're pointing out the ego and self-forces as a teacher. You're saying, you have this, you have this.
Right. And those work in both of you. They're not separated out. Like, in the sense, you think of a 14-year-old and say, oh, no, I have a... As Walt Disney does, they all become love stories. Right. They become two personalities. And they miss the whole point that they're not supposed to be two personalities falling in love. You know?
Right.
So that's a different thing. And so you work with that relevant, making it relevant that way. And you can look at, okay,
so
well...
once you find the relevance...
Yeah, once you find the relevance of
it goes in the next thing.
It goes in the next thing. You put that into the unity place of the next one.
Okay.
And then you use whatever you came up with, these other 5, to get a sense of, well, what is... So if this is the unity, relevant unity, how can I... And this is the polarity on this page. How can I express that polarity in terms of the relevance that's on the other, previously?
Okay.
You see what I'm saying
So
there?
what goes in the middle? Is that what you're talking about?
Well...
That goes on the next page? No.
Well, yeah, in the middle, that's really that depends on you in a way, what goes in the middle. You can leave the middle unknown because that's sort of future oriented. Okay, these forces are going to work now. It's almost like where are they going to lead to? Goes in the middle. And you don't have to answer that question necessarily, but it might come to you. Oh, I'm seeing where this is taking me now, and I'm seeing the wisdom of this image and where these forces are going to take me. So like the destiny that you experience with a class, and it would go in here. But it won't. It has to be something that I would say I wouldn't even put anything in the middle until I've done all 3 of those elements. So I've gotten all the way to the top. And I guess in a sense, this is going to give you another filling perception.
Okay.
So once you've articulated all this, you're going to get enough. Oh, I'm seeing something about what's going to happen for my class this year. And as that arises, that's when the work in the middle comes up. Most of this other stuff is coming from here. It's all coming from the top. It's coming from your initial feeling perception, and then this middle part would be something that then emerges. It's like new birth. That would emerge out of here.
And that would be still kind of in your image language.
Right. You still use your image.
Not looking at the relevance.
Right. Okay. And then once you the whole thing, the model is to use this image model. This is a model that is your image is where your wisdom comes from. You use that wisdom to inform yourself about the relevance. Once you get this unity, you use this information to inform you. Okay, now I got this expression about the fire in my class. Then I'm going to use what I said about the polarity here to see what the polarity to that is in my class. And so for them it's relevant though. So I have a new polarity here, but it's relevant because I'm doing it. Let me see, like I said, we could look at this one could be the duck dipping into the water. And that intensity of fire that's necessary for it to get, its food. And so this one could be we were saying that this one is fire. The duck getting the food is the fire. Now the polarity here was that the duck. What we can see right away, if I decide that fire is the duck going into the water to get the food, then we have already created a stronger connection with this polarity, which is actually the water element. So we can see that what we have done here is that once we come up with this thing about fire, the fire is more related to what the duck does in the water than what the duck does in the air. Because we didn't come up with fire is the duck soaring toward the sun. We came with fire is the duck seeking its nourishment. You see how you could have think with either one.
How did you jump to that element? Because I'm I'm not clear how you brought in elements.
Well, we said initially that the class may have a tendency to be
Yes.
fire.
Yes.
And so we're going to express this unity in terms of the class as fire.
Okay.
And then when we expressed it in terms of the fire, it turned out to be about the duck meeting its hunger. So then we would see right away that, when I express the fire of the class, it manifests in terms of the water element and not the air element.
Right.
And that would be that would be wisdom. That would be an information that you had about your class. My class is not going to necessarily. My class is going to one where the fire is going to come, maybe in its metabolic realm.
Right.
It's not going to come in its head forces.
Right.
The fire is not going to be in the head. The fire is going to be in metabolic forces. So that's the kind of way that wisdom would emerge once you would see what would be what came to you in terms of questions. Or if I looked at
So in other words, when you look at the relevance, what you need to do is look at your class and say, how is this image relative to my class?
Exactly.
That's the transition.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you're doing. And there's 3 ways you can do that, but there are other ways you can do it. You can do it in terms of just looking at my class in regard to how it may transition in the year from one of the correspondence to analysis. Looking at my class in terms of what does this human consciousness look for my class this year, or how do I see it? Is my class in the seasons? Does my class feel like fruit? Does it feel like seed? Is it going to be stronger? How is it going to manifest in those different seasonal things? So you ask yourself those questions, and then you answer it.
So you don't really know your class yet in the children, so
Then
it's like a much later. Yeah.
You guys okay with me turning off the fan?
Yeah.
So you always have to have some feeling perception, of course, to start off with. And where it usually is going to come from, it can come purely from the archetypes, but that's not, ideal. It is ideal that somehow you have known your class, but you could make it from the archetype and then modify it. I would say for instance, if you're going to your class, and I don't know if you got to receive the
I've got my class, and I have lots of notes on my class.
Right. And so the archetypes. So I can always put with an ideal calendar or so from the archetypes that I know are relevant for my class this year. So I can know this information. I can know my class is going to be transitioning. You can from correspondence to analysis this year. Mm-hmm. I can know my class is going to have this ego emergence in the fairy, ego and soul split in the fairy in the elemental world.
Right.
I can know. I know that the season's going to go like this. There's going to be fruit. When they come back to me, they're coming out of that element of ripening the fruit to the seed, to the fruit falling off the tree. That's what happens, in the season. The ripening of the fruit in the summer, it falls off, and the seed is planted. Then you have the new plant, and then you have the flowering in the spring. So that's going to be the transition of the year. And so whatever comes up for you, obviously that initial feeling perception, the source of that is still difficult. It is kind of difficult if you don't have some interaction with your class but something may come up for you from who knows where. Mm-hmm. You ask yourself, do I have a feeling perception to work with? And you say, well, no, I don't. So then, this process can't take place yet. But for whatever reason, if you have a feeling perception you're trying to articulate, these are the...
but, you could do this after the first week of school.
Right, exactly.
It's not the best. But if you've done all the preparation, and you understand how to do the process,
right.
Probably.
You could also re-look at it. Could you re-look at it? Like if you kind of
Right.
did this,
Exactly.
you got a few weeks in and you're like, what I thought was this really is manifesting.
Because it's the whole idea of having the ideal, which is platonic, and then having the thing in itself.
Yeah.
So you can always start with the ideal if you have any feeling. The feeling that you may be having may be a feeling that's really very platonic in its nature, and it's not concrete. But you can start with a platonic response, and then bring that more into the world later.
So in other words, you could work with the cognitive, the ego, and the seasonal, and get a clear picture and how that relates essentially to you, because you are part of class too.
Exactly.
And then really bring in the picture of the child and see how that transforms them, and the children, and see how that.
And of course, that's always ongoing for what our teachers really. You're always adapting and changing and responding to the children.
Yes, right.
I mean, because there's a feedback loop. Even if the calendar of soul itself is totally what it should be, the children are still going to be living in that and bringing new things. So in a way, you're always going to be adjusting and changing this to a certain degree. That doesn't have to. It shouldn't really stay static.
Yeah.
But it gives you a place from which. See, what we want is transformation. Transformation is really the secret to everything we do. So the idea that things can transform, whatever I create can be transformed. That's the essential thing that a teacher should always know, including the child. So whatever I create, a lesson plan or whatever, that's why you do free rendering in the grades every morning. Because, what children bring me in free rendering, I have my lesson can transform. It should be able to transform. Right. And so your lesson should always be able to transform. And that happening is what we model in front of the children. Right. That is really the ideal that transformations are taking place is essentially that human gift that we should be modeling as much as we can. And when we don't let things transform is when we are...
I mean, transformations is another way of saying, it's another way of responding to essentially what in a negative way you could say it was a mistake.
Right.
I made a mistake, and it's kind of a nice thing to know because I make so many mistakes.
And the implication of saying you made a mistake is that you see a split with the past. Uh-huh. Transformation, there's no split with the past.
Okay.
The past is reworked and it goes in a direction you didn't think was going. So you never make a mistake. You simply either have access to the past or you don't have access to the past. Okay. And when you don't have access to the past, you can't have transformation. The whole foundation for transformation for human beings is the fact that the body is the past present. And I can access the body, transform it, and I can create a new future. Now, the body as it is pushing me in a certain direction. Okay. But I can always access that body, change that body, and move in a different direction. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're always doing. We always want to be transformation, always involves bringing the past along and transforming it, and renewing it. Not saying, I made a mistake.
Wipe that out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because sometimes you could be working out of this and then you get 2 new children. And then your whole class transforms along with your image has to...
Right. And if you can see in reality, like you said, you had a class, and that class had a certain nature. Yeah. And then something changed. Well, that nature changed. It didn't disappear. The class that was there is still there, transformed by the new element. So you should always be incorporating things. You should always bring it forward. It shouldn't be like, that other class doesn't exist anymore, and now I have something totally different. Right. The whole idea of transformation is that you incorporate, you reach back and renew things in a certain kind of way that brings it all forward. And then you don't have stress. You have light. Stress has to do with the fact that, that's what trauma's all about. I was traumatized, and I want to ignore the trauma, I want to repress that, and I want to go into a transition. Then we feel tension. We never can go forward until we actually get the tools to transform the trauma to do something different so that we can actually have a new future. Because otherwise that is still pushing us in a certain direction. Mm-hmm. And the old is still pushing us in a certain direction, even though we're trying to ignore it and say we have something new happening. That's what, it's hard to model, but that's, I'm at the home of the innocence, boy, I tell you, it's really, it's interesting to see the home of the innocence, the adults who are triggered by the trauma of the children all the time. And so, therefore, they can't really work in that transformative way with the children because themselves, they call it they're counter-aggressive. And, of course, they have articulated that in training. They said, you can't be counter-aggressive. And if you're counter-aggressive, you're probably going to get fired essentially.
Sure.
They don't get fired because they don't they don't have enough staff over there. It takes a long time to fire someone, you know. But that happens. People are counter-aggressive, you know, and we don't really meet the trauma and are informed by the trauma of the human being that's in front of us. We are really dealing with our own trauma and being counter-aggressive.
Good idea.
Let's see, where's that going? You asked a question and I got a little bit off.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good, but that's just when I can't go back and bring it forward.
I asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, which is great. Oh, I know. So we were looking at, I was basically saying exactly how to, reiterating how to use this by moving from the image that's manifest. So first thing, you manifest the image. And by doing the polarities and units, then you take that manifest image and then you make it relevant. In utilizing whatever archetypes are going to be that engage your class, either class itself as a being or the things that we know about what we're doing in the classroom with the human being, moving them cognitively, working with consciousness, human consciousness that is appropriate for the age, whatever elements that we're doing in our curriculum, we want to use those to make this image relevant. And then once we make that image relevant, we need to make it an actual, we need to give it its hereditary part. In a way, we need to give it its hereditary part. Its hereditary part are the methods that we bring into the class. Mm-hmm. That is the hereditary part. That's the stuff that just comes out of the past. It's just the hereditary stuff that people have decided for years and years and years. It's the way you do the work. And then we got to take the hereditary part and we have to inform it with this relevant understanding.
So would you do a whole new circle new series for that?
Yeah, you do so you have that, you do the relevance, that's a whole new circle. Okay. So to make this thing relevant, you got to do all those elements, just not you start with the unity, but you got to do the polarities on that part, okay. And you got to do the connection between the polarity and unity. All 6 parts are to be on each page.
And then another one for the methods.
Another one for how is this going to inform my methods that I'm going to use in the classroom. And you would go back to the unity. So I have this unity, and we've said that my class has this fire quality, and that fire quality is in its metabolic, not in its head. Okay, well, how is that going to inform my methods? Mm-hmm. You know, so and that's what I do. And I go to that. So therefore, my circle may be informed by that, or something element. May inform the art I bring, may inform the fairy tales I bring. How is this going to inform the actual work that I do with the methods? So the methods are alive in their response to the children.
So can I just run this by you? So if I say, I got my image of the duck, I did what we did before, and then when I look at my class, I see that I have a lot of anxiety and very weak etheric. Mm-hmm. And so I bring that forward into my relevance circle, and when I look at all these, especially the looking for food and escaping from danger, so then I say, oh, okay, my curriculum is going to need to have this element of building the etheric or providing food for the etheric, mm-hmm. and also calming the anxiety.
Right, exactly.
Something like that?
Yeah, like that. And that will be directed, and when you do that, you have to do that in all those 6 phases too.
So I would do this with that. Right?
So you would take that image of the duck getting the food, and then you would articulate that. What you just said would probably be the unity. Mm-hmm. Then I would find the polarities out of that.
Yes.
And all those 6 connections.
So plug that in here.
Right.
Find all that and move to the next one.
Exactly. And then, out of that you have a real rich body of wisdom that can then be living for you when you engage with your class and engage with your curriculum.
Right, you know exactly why you're doing everything and how when that arises, that's
exactly.
this, so this is how I respond. That's great.
Yeah.
That's not what my class then.
Right.
But oh well, could be great. Have to start over.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, this, and you know, in doing all this, we're doing the process that we're really working with. You know, I mean, that's what the whole intuitive thing is that this unfolding. You know, Steiner is saying this is how the world is unfolding. The world isn't a manifestation out of wholes to parts. You know, out of being which has less sense of individual character to being on this plane that has this very individual. And then in the evolution of history, we have the same thing. Being was less individual in the past, and it's getting more and more individual. And so feeling perception is like that. Feeling perception is like being that's undifferentiated. And we're trying to differentiate that. We're doing this whole of the parts, going from the unity to the manifold. And so if we practice that a lot, that will just help us. It helps us with the children knowing what's going on. We begin to see these processes a lot. You know.
So, very helpful. I'm excited to look at my children. Figure some of that out.
Yeah, I'd be interested maybe. Now, Summerfield is the school that you're going to be at, and that is in the Bay Area?
It's in Santa Rosa, so it's about, so Marin is just across the Golden Gate,
okay.
North, and then Santa Rosa is like the next big city. So it's an hour and a half from San Francisco Airport.
Mm-hmm.
And still, I mean, there's a lot of diversity. They said that there's something like 7 different languages spoken at home. Asian, African American, Jewish, Brazilian.
Is it a private water school or a charter? Private, not a charter.
Yeah, China. 2 kids from China. So yeah. Wow. Pretty interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and have it. I mean, it's just like, this redheaded boy from. A redheaded boy who